I love things on a really dark background, so I especially love this beautiful vase of flowers, simple and sweet. You want to do a very detailed drawing for this because we're going to be doing and painting petal by petal and shape by shape. So you want your drawing to be nice and detailed. The only thing you're going to misget on this drawing will be the little stems for that baby's breath, and then a couple of the outside baby's breath that kind of hangs into the black. We're using our large 2-inch flat. We're going to be using a number 10, a number 6, and a number 2 round. We're going to be using our nice skinny number 1 rigger and also our real fine liner. Colors, we're going to be using alizarin crimson, and I added just a little touch of cad red to my crimson. We'll be using some turquoise, which is in the vase, some indigo, and some black, which will be part of the background, where I mixed those two so that I could get a nice dark background, but not necessarily just an intense black. We're going to be using sap green. We'll also be using some burnt umber, a little bit of burnt sienna. As I said before, we're going to be using some salt and we're going to be using some of our misket. The misket, again, you don't have to misket that entire thing of the baby's breath, but just some that are hanging down into the black and along the edges so that you can keep those nice and white. We're going to start by painting with some watered down sap, and we'll be painting in those real pale little leaves that come off the stems. I'm going to paint them with watered down sap, leaving an edge of white on them. Also a little edge of white in the middle for like that main little vein. We'll cover that up later, but it just adds to the detail in these little leaves. When I'm done painting those in, I'm going to throw some salt on them. Now when we start to paint the petals of the roses, some of them that have a little bit of color to them, I'm going to wet first so that when I put that little bit of color in, that little bit of color is just going to bleed into the wet water and I'll have some nice soft edges. I'm using both my alizarin color and on some of the petals that look like they're starting to turn brown a little bit on the edges, I'm going to use my burnt sienna for those. So you watch the video a little bit ahead. You'll see which ones I'm doing, and then you can go ahead and do that and we'll continue on. Now I'm sorry my camera went off the paper a little bit on this one, but I'm glad that it went off on this and not something important. I'm wetting in that whole baby's breath area just with water. And then I'm going to drop in some of my alizarin crimson here and there. Not necessarily painting the entire thing with the alizarin crimson, just dropping in some of the color and then throwing on some salt. That way it's going to look as if there are some areas that are going to remain white and will shadow in and form those little individual flowers later. You also want to go ahead and throw some salt on that then. We're going to begin working on the vase. And I really think that it would be beneficial for you to watch the video ahead so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. I'm picking out the shapes that I see of color first. I'm using some turquoise. I'm going to be using some sap green and my watered down black. But I am actually picking out the shapes that I see in that vase. As you can see, I drew those in too so that I wouldn't have too much confusion as to what I was supposed to be painting. Watch the video ahead so that you can see step by step how I'm painting in the shapes. You don't necessarily have to do it in the order that I'm doing it. I'm doing my turquoises, then I'm doing some of my saps, then I'm moving into some of my blacks, going back to some of my saps, but they all have specific shapes. So if you watch the video ahead, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. And then by looking at the picture, you can easily understand how to do this. Continue painting in the shapes that you see. If you feel that you need to draw every shape, you can. Otherwise, you can just freehand paint them. But you really are painting in shapes. All of these shapes will get tied together later on with washes of watered down black or sap. So they will get pulled together, but not necessarily right now. So that's why I suggest you watch the video ahead a little bit so that you know what's coming. Continue painting in your shapes until you've almost completely covered all of the glass. From here, I'm still going to start to cover up some of my shapes now with my watered down sap green. I will cover up some with some watered down black to make it a light gray tone. Again, these are all shapes that you can really see in your picture. So it's not necessary for you to do these in the same order that I'm doing them, but they will have to be covered with some type of color. You're not going to leave that much pure white in the vase itself. So continue to finish up with your vase, except for the white highlights that will come on later, but you want to go ahead and add in your additional coloring now. Again, I suggest you just watch the video a little bit ahead. There's really no need for me to just keep yapping at you and talking about something that's just repetitive. You are coloring in your shapes, different colors, different washes. There's really no salting or anything. There will be a little tiny bit of dry brushing later, but not a whole lot. So watch your video. You can watch, 30 seconds at a time and then do something, or watch, a couple minutes at a time, whatever makes it easier for you. Now we're going to leave our vase go for a little bit. We're going to leave it dry really well. And we're going to start on the white roses. The white roses are just done in shadows. So you're going to be using different values of watered down black. If you don't want to make them black, you can use a little bit of indigo or a little bit of black mixed with indigo. You could even use a little bit of black and some sap if you want to, but I simply used watered down black. You're going to look at your picture, all of your petals that have a shadow on them. You are painting those in first. Then I went back and I did all of the petals that have that little curve to them, curve outwards, it's not a fold, it's just kind of a bend outward of the petal. And I dry brushed on those to give the effect of it turning outward. Petal by petal, we are working petal by petal. Watered down black, different tones of gray. Most of the petals have a white edge, so I left a white edging on the petal, if not for that whole, curled part of the petal that comes outward. But the other petals that are smaller, I left a small, thin white edge on them. The actual roses will get some shadows to them later, but right now I am just painting in the shadowed parts of the petals one by one. Then I'll go back and do the part that curls outward, and I will dry brush that in an arched formation to give that, that petal some roundness. And then once that is all finished, then I will go back and do my shadowing. Now when you're done with your first rose, you want to make sure that you've left some white areas. You're going to let that rose alone. We will shadow later, and you're going to do your second white rose. And you'll be doing that exactly the same way that you did your first one. I'm going to shadow in my petals first, one by one. Then I will go back and do that dry brushing of the curled petals that are curling out. All of that is going to be done petal by petal. So you want to take your time. You want to make sure that you have your petals that you're working on dry before you start working on one right next to it. You don't want to go wet against wet. You want to go wet against dry. So you want to make sure that the petals that you're working on are dry before you do the one next to it. Follow your picture, and you want to just make sure that you have all of your shadows, your shadowed petals in. This isn't the shadowing of the entire rose, the back of the rose or the side of the rose. That will come later. Watch the video ahead. See where I've dry brushed. See where I've painted in. And then you can do it, or you can do it as I do it, whatever is easier and works for you. But you're going to be working on this one now for a few minutes, and then we will continue on. Okay, we're going to be finishing up, continue working this second rose. It doesn't look like very much now, but it will. Get all of your shadowing in, and then we are going to start to work on that rose that is in the background behind the baby's breath. There is actually a rose back there. Very little detail to that, if anything. It's just painted in with watered down gray. Very little detail. Once that one is dry, we're going to work on the pink rose. Now your pink rose can be alizarin crimson. You can make it purple, you can make it orange, whatever color you want that to be. I used my alizarin crimson and I mixed it with a tiny little bit of red, I didn't want it to be too light pink. I also mixed in a little bit of black because I wanted it to be almost like a maroon color of pink. But I didn't want it to be too shadowed looking because it does get shadowing on it. So I didn't want it to look too shadowed right off the bat. So I mixed my alizarin crimson, a little touch of red, and a tiny little bit of black. If you don't want to use black, you could certainly use some indigo or even some purple. And you can see it's still nice and pink, but it's not like a shocking pink. I didn't want it to be too bright. Painting it in one petal at a time. The whole petal, just painting it in one petal at a time. After that dries, I will go back in and put a shadowed color on the petals except for the rollover part. That will remain this nice lighter pink color. But for now, we are painting petal by petal. You can go ahead and watch to see what I've done. Watch the video ahead, but we are doing petal by petal. Taking a little bit of a break from painting all of my pink petals, giving them a nice chance to dry. And I'm going to move over to my baby's breath. And I'm going to start to pull out some little individual buds. I am not painting 50 individual buds. I'm going to pick out some specific areas where I want a bud to be, I'm going to paint it in with that same color I'm using for my rose, and then with a paper towel, I'm going to texture it. It's going to lift some of that dark color off, but it will leave some also and make it look like a little crinkled bud. Again, I'm just painting in a few places, not 50 individual little flowers. Where my salting really worked, I'm leaving that area alone because it already has some great texturing from the salting. So pick out some sections or some areas, put your color on, texture it with your rough paper towel. Just lightly hold it on that paint. Don't press it down to lift the entire circle of paint that you put down. You just want the tips of your tissue or your paper towel to touch that paint. While that's working and drying, I'm going to go back and finish painting in my petals on my flower, on my pink rose. And then I will start to shadow and put some watered down black in between some of my baby's breath area to help pull out some other little buds that are not even painted. But I'm picking out some like triangular areas or some little zigzag areas and forming flowers just with some shadowing. If you look at your picture, you'll see where there are some continuous shadowed lines, zigzag lines, little triangles. That's what you want to do in this salted blob, because that's going to help to make it look like little individual buds. If you want to try to draw a couple individual buds on just little circles and then put your shadowing around that, if that'll help you, that's fine. But remember, these are just little watered down areas that are going to make it look like a clump of baby's breath. Going back then to my pink rose, I'm going to go ahead and finish painting in my petals that have not been painted yet. They are going to just still be that same color, the entire petal. I'm working wet against dry now, so I'm getting some hard edges, which is great. That's exactly what I want. And then once that whole flower is painted in, I will add a little bit of indigo to that color or a little bit of black, whatever you prefer. And then that is the color that I am going to paint in the sections of each petal that is not the section that rolls over, the section that curls out over the edge. That's going to separate out those little curled edges from the rest of the whole petal. Looks great. Now you're going to add your darkness to your color. You're using the same color, but you've added in either a little bit of indigo or a little bit of black. And now that color is a little bit darker, a little bit more intense. And I am coloring in the parts of my petal that are not the parts that are rolled over. Look at your picture. You'll be able to see exactly where those parts are. You are going to avoid painting them. So you're going to have those rollover parts to the petal lighter, the original color of the flower. When you are done with that, you want everything to really dry. You're going to stop and take a breath. Now, when you are finished, after you've taken your breath, make sure everything is dry because we are going to put on our first wash of black on our background. Surprise, there it is. It doesn't matter that it's spotty. It doesn't matter that it has some washback. It doesn't matter. This is the first of a couple washes. The lighter part at the bottom, that white stripish area, that's the only part of my background that I wet. So that when I brought my color down, that part I kept wiping off with my paintbrush so that I could keep that lighter. It does not matter how splotchy this looks right now because we're going to be putting on a second wash, and if necessary, you're going to put on a third wash. So don't worry about it. You have to let your first wash really dry before you put on a second one. I let mine dry for about 3 hours. I'm going to put on my second wash now. Same thing. I used black mixed with some indigo. I'm using my big brush for the biggest areas. I am really, really wet so it doesn't start to dry on me. And I'm using a smaller number 6 or a number 4 to paint up close to my flowers. But you want to be really wet so that it does not start drying on you. You do not want it to start drying where you put on the bigger sections, because then you're going to have hard lines when you take what you've done close to your flower and meet up with your what you did with your big brush. So you must do this really, really wet. When you get down to that part where that whitish line is, same thing. You want to go ahead and wet that whitish area first, and then you will bring your dark color right into that wet so that it'll bleed right in, and you'll still have that nice whitish area through the bottom of your picture, almost like a streak of light through the base of your picture. As long as you are nice and wet, you can manipulate that by wiping it out with your big brush, but it has to be nice and wet. If your second wash doesn't dry like you want it to, again, wait for a couple hours and you can put a third wash on if you have to. It really shouldn't be necessary though. 2 should be good, But if you need that third one, it's perfectly okay to do that. Now, once you have your second wash on, you want to look at your picture as a whole. Where do you need some deeper shadows? Where might you need to add a little bit of green? I'm going to go ahead and shadow in by following my picture the sections of my roses that have a full shadow on them. If you look at your picture, you will see that there are some pictures of the roses where some flowers are overhanging each other and causing a shadow on the entire section of the rose. That means that the little white edges that you've left, everything gets a nice little shadow on it. It's a watered down black shadow, not intensely dark, and it does not cover the entire rose, just a section of the rose. If you look at your picture, you will be able to see exactly where that is. It's going to be on all of the roses, even the pink one in some sections. Do it rose at a time. Don't try to, jump from rose to rose. Do the front white one first so that you're totally happy with the shadowing on that one. Then go to the one on the right so that you're totally happy with that one. Then go to the pink one in the back. The pink one in the back, there's not a lot of shadowing on that one because that one is the top one. That one has the most light. The pink one has the least amount of shadowing to it. So you want to just follow your picture. There's not a lot of shadowing to that one. Just a couple shadows on the rollover parts of some of the outer petals. They get a shadow. But the pink one itself, the top of the pink one has the least amount of shadowing. Once all of your shadowing is done, any shadows that have to be put on to show some depth into those petals, make sure you've got that done. Soften the edges. And then you're going to use your very fine liner, and on some of the outside petals, you're going to do some veining in the petals. Just on a couple of the outside petals. You're not going to see those veins on all the little inside petals. This is just mainly the few outside petals. Those petals that are the utmost outer, the oldest, biggest petals, they are the ones that are showing the nice, fine little vines. A couple of the bigger rollover parts also can show a little bit of your veins in your petals, but again, not all of the petals. It's not necessary at all. Then we're going to touch up our vase. Any sections of our vase that need to be shadowed in, you're not going to have a lot of light under those roses on the glass. So I'm shadowing that in with my watered down black. I'm doing a little bit of dry brushing with some black to show some shaping in my vase. Filling in what I think needs to be filled in to push my flowers out and push my vase down. And again, I'm just following my picture, looking at my picture, what needs deepened, what needs to be defined a little bit. You can watch what I've done in the video before you do it, or you can decide on your own what you think needs done. This isn't any of the white highlighting, that'll come later. This is just where I need some shadowing, some deepening of color. Now for my white highlighting. My white highlighting is just going to go on with my rigger and also my real fine liner. And I'm following the white lines from my picture. Some of them are rounded, some of them are straight. There's a few dots here and there, but I am just following my picture to make sure that I have all of those nice white light highlights on my glass. There are no highlights on my flowers at all. This is just on my glass. Now before you take your misketing off your little baby's breath stems, you want to make sure that you're happy with your background. If you feel that you need to put another wash on, then definitely don't remove your misket until you are happy with your background. Then you can go ahead and take all of your misketing off of that baby's breath stem. I'm going to paint those in both with some umber and a little bit of sienna. I'll also drop in a little bit of watered down black here and there, just maybe at the bases of some of my thicker stems. And I'm even going to throw a little bit of salt on there just for some of my stems that are a little bit thicker to pick up a little bit of texturing. They go down, the stems go into the baby's breath. So you want to make sure that you don't have them all stopping where the baby breath stops. They go right into the baby's breath to make it look like the baby's breath is growing on the ends of all of your stems. So go ahead and take it down into the baby's breath. You're going to do that both with your paintbrush and then with your real fine liner. You will add some additional little tiny branch stems. But you want to get all of those painted in, and then we will finish up on the little bit of baby's breath shadowing and coloring, and we will be done. Go ahead and get those real fine little branches in, that's right into the baby's breath, those little fine branches that are holding the little buds. Let that dry really, really well. Add any little bits that you need to of pink. If your pink bled out too much and you want to add a little bit more pink here and there. If you need any more defined shadowing here and there, go ahead and put that in. All your little fine touches that you need to do, you want to get those put in before you end everything. I felt the need to put in some darker pink along the base of this clump of baby's breath in the middle, just kind of to continue the coloring from that pretty pink rose. Not that it really needed, the baby's breath needed it, but I wanted my eye to pick up some more pink. I love this picture. Simple and sweet. Happy painting.